Today, I would like to talk about one of my favorite artists, Scott Christian Sava. I found him through YouTube and TikTok probably 2 years ago, but as one of my favorite artists, I can slowly see his influence being put into some of the work that I create. He's a very optimistic person, and I really admire the fact that he is constantly trying to make his art better, even though some people would consider him a master with some of the works that he's done. This is one of the quotes that I got directly from his website, which is make the world a kinder, gentler place, one story at a time. This is something that I can absolutely see in his progress as an artist, is that he's constantly trying to make everything kinder because he has a not so positive past that he is trying to remediate. And he's also trying to show that in his art, which I really appreciate. He was born December 4th in 1968. He's an animator, illustrator, director, and producer. And as I mentioned before, I consider him an influencer, or at least an art influencer on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. He went to the Academy of Art Youth University in San Francisco, and he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder at 53, which is, I think, a big part of him wanting to make the world a kinder place, is because he's mentioned this in a couple of his videos where he was struggling a lot with navigating the world, and he realizes now that he was not a kind person for a very large portion of his life just because he wasn't getting the resources that he needed because of his autism, that a lot of people just ignored. And a lot of his videos are kind of going over how he's trying to become a better person, but also on how his art is going to change and how he has changed and he can be kinder because of these resources, and how it's also frustrating to get a diagnosis like that at such an older age compared to a lot of people. But despite that diagnosis, he was able to work on a lot of things. He made this movie called Animal Crackers for his son. It came out in 2017. For a very large portion of his life, he was trying to become a Marvel comic artist, which he was able to succeed with the Spider-Man Quality of Life comics. He illustrated quite a few of those. He made multiple flyers for Star Trek. He created this book series for his sons, the Dreamland Chronicles. Quite a few books in there. Absolutely stunning. He also created Hyperactive and Cameron and the Dinosaurs. Majority of these were created for his sons. He uses a lot of mixed media, but primarily focuses on watercolor, gouache, and color pencil. In majority of his videos, he will either explain or you can watch him. He will use watercolor first, and depending on how the watercolor goes, depends on how much gouache he decides to put in the piece. So if he ends up making multitude of mistakes, he'll use the gouache as kind of like that opaque material, and then he uses color pencil for some of his detail work, and then he uses ink pens to ink everything up. This is one of his pieces on the left here. This is the White Flower 2. And he specifically lists gouache and ink. The video that he created with this piece also showed him using watercolor and a little bit of color pencil as well, which I find a little bit amusing. I wanted to share this video of his work and kind of his thought process, because this is one of those times where it really inspires me to put a lot more into my piece than just the realism. A lot of people in this class have probably heard me complain about my high school art teacher. Even with her flaws, one of the big things that I'm still trying to move forward is putting emotion into my piece. And so this piece on Chapel Roan, he's specifically stating on how he's trying to do that. And I think he captures it wonderfully, but also I can see where he could have room for growth in some of those pieces. So as he mentioned, he's that's something he's actively trying to strive for is putting that humanity into art, which I happened to see this video right before we did our self-portraits. And so comparing this to classwork, a lot of the content that I see of his that doesn't make it to his website is considered fan art, which is why it doesn't typically make it to the website. But he does a lot of portraits of people nevertheless. And so that kind of reminded me of the self-portrait. But also, I saw that video just before I started creating it. And I wanted to add kind of that emotion into the piece, even if there isn't a lot of color and such. And based off the feedback that I got for the self-portrait, I feel like I was able to get some of that where there is that sense of mystery, there is that sense of like grief. And then I also wanted to bring in he's heavily inspired by the Art Nouveau style, which includes a lot of patterns and stuff, which had me thinking about the extra credit that we had to do for the class. And for the extra credit, I saw this pattern for my background and I immediately thought of Scott Sava, and specifically this Jenna Rose piece that he created just because of the vibrancy and the colors. But he uses a lot of patterns in his works and a lot of colorful backgrounds just to really add something. And you can also see it a little bit with this Chapel Roan piece where um, he used a circle stencil to create this background, but sometimes he uses flowers and such like that. So this is Scott Sava, and I really hope you guys look into him as much as I do. I think majority of his socials will be SS Sava or let me yes, majority of his time it would be S Sava Art or something along those lines. And as I mentioned, he's on TikTok, he's on Instagram, he's on YouTube. But I think he's a really powerful person to look into. Thanks for listening.